Would you survive 24 hours in the Dark Ages? No shortcuts, no second chances, just one long, difficult day. It sounds simple, but nothing back then was. Every hour tested people in ways we've forgotten. You don't need a week to find out. One day is more than enough. Let's say it's the first minute. You wake up with a full bladder, still half asleep, and reach for the bathroom door. But there isn't one. There's no bathroom at all. Just cold air, dirt floors, and a very real problem. In the Dark Ages, getting fresh water wasn't as simple as turning a tap. You'd need to drag yourself to the nearest well or stream, often hundreds of yards away from your home. And that water wasn't clean at all. A typical medieval water source was filled with animal waste, dead bugs, and human sewage. Nothing says good morning like drinking from the same place where the village dumps its poop. The average person in medieval times used about 5 gallons of water per day, while we use between 80 and 100 gallons now. This huge difference wasn't because they cared about saving water, it was because getting water was incredibly hard work. You'd carry heavy wooden buckets back and forth many times each day just for basic needs. As for toilet paper, that soft roll you love so much, gone. Medieval people used whatever they could find: leaves, moss, hay, or even their left hand. The rich might use wool or cloth, while others used smooth stones or sticks. Your behind would be rougher than sandpaper by sunset. Public toilets were just holes in the ground, often shared by many people with no privacy. In towns, people often threw waste straight into the streets. If you heard someone yell a warning, you had seconds to dodge before someone emptied their waste bucket out the window above you. Without clean conditions, sickness spread quickly. Gut diseases and fevers killed many people. 1 out of every 3 children died before reaching 5 years old, mostly from these water-carried illnesses that we now prevent easily. Your body, used to clean water and soap, would struggle in this dirty world. The lack of clean water would hit you hard and fast, making your stomach turn and your skin crawl. You'd be praying for a modern bathroom within hours, but unpleasant bathroom situations would be just the first challenge you'd face in your journey through these brutal times. Got a headache? Tough luck. In the Dark Ages, pain relief and medicine as we know them simply did not exist. No pills, no syrups, no quick fixes for your aches and pains. That throbbing tooth? The medieval dentist, who was often just the local blacksmith, would yank it out without any numbing agents. Hope you enjoy the taste of screaming. A typical tooth extraction meant holding you down while ripping the offending tooth from your jaw using crude metal tools. Many people died from these basic procedures due to massive blood loss or infection. When illness struck in medieval times, treatments ranged from useless to downright dangerous. Bloodletting was among the most common cures. Doctors believed that draining blood would balance your body's humors. They would cut open your veins or apply leeches to suck your blood. This practice often weakened patients further, making recovery even less likely. For fever, physicians might prescribe a tonic made from ground-up earthworms, metals like mercury, or powdered Egyptian mummy. Yes, actual ground-up mummies were considered medicine. Taking these remedies was like playing Russian roulette with all chambers loaded. Even a minor cut could be a death sentence. Without antibiotics, infections spread quickly. By the time your wound turned green and started oozing, you were probably counting your final hours. Gangrene often led to limb amputation, performed without anesthesia using a simple saw and cauterized with red-hot iron. The statistics are grim. Life expectancy in the Dark Ages averaged 25 to 30 years. Nearly half of all children died before reaching their 10th birthday. A woman faced a 1 in 3 chance of dying during childbirth. Epidemics regularly wiped out entire villages. The Black Death alone killed 30 to 60% of Europe's population in just 4 years. Pain was simply part of everyday life. Chronic conditions that we manage today with medication, arthritis, migraines, back pain, meant a lifetime of suffering with little relief. Herbs like willow bark, which contains a compound similar to aspirin, provided minimal comfort, but nothing close to modern painkillers. Your body, accustomed to quick relief from any discomfort, would be in constant shock from the relentless pain. A cut could send you straight to your grave if you couldn't handle the pain and infection. How would you cope? And even if you survived the lack of medicine, you'd soon discover that simply keeping your body nourished would pose its own deadly challenge. Your stomach growls loudly, and suddenly you realize there's no fridge to raid, no delivery app, not even a corner store. In the Dark Ages, food wasn't just something you grabbed whenever hunger hit. It was a daily battle for survival. The average medieval peasant ate mostly bread, 2 to 3 pounds of it daily. But this wasn't your soft white sandwich bread. It was a dense, hard loaf made from barley or rye, often filled with dirt, pebbles, and even sawdust when grain supplies ran low. Biting into medieval bread was like chewing on sandpaper with surprise rocks. Meat was a luxury most commoners rarely enjoyed. Peasants might eat meat once a week if they were lucky, usually on Sunday after church. The rest of the time? Pottage, a thin stew made from whatever vegetables could be found, boiled in the same pot day after day. Medieval leftovers didn't need containers, they just evolved into the next meal. Talk about reducing food waste. During winter months, people survived on stored root vegetables, dried beans, and whatever preserved meat they could afford. Vitamin deficiencies were rampant, causing diseases like scurvy that made gums bleed and teeth fall out. The original liquid diet was just your teeth dissolving in your mouth. 4 out of 5 peasants showed signs of serious malnutrition. Hunting might seem like a solution, but forests were owned by nobles and royalty, and poaching carried harsh penalties, including death. One medieval court record shows that a man caught stealing a rabbit was blinded as punishment. Turns out, finders keepers wasn't a legally recognized concept when it came to woodland creatures. Food preservation relied on salt, smoke, or fermentation. Without refrigeration, meat spoiled quickly, and food poisoning was common. Almost everyone suffered from intestinal parasites due to undercooked or spoiled food. Meals lacked variety and flavor. Salt was expensive, and spices were worth their weight in gold. Sugar existed only for the extremely wealthy. Your taste buds would find medieval meals bland at best, disgusting at worst. Could you survive on what you could scavenge or trade for, or would hunger get the best of you? And even if you managed to find enough to eat, your weakened body would become the perfect target for the countless invisible enemies floating through the air around you. Disease was the invisible killer that haunted every moment of Dark Ages life. Without modern medicine, simple illnesses became death sentences, and understanding of how sickness spread was almost non-existent. The medieval world faced plagues that wiped out entire towns. The Black Death killed more than 1/3 of Europe's population between 1347 and 1351. That's about 25 million people. Those who caught it often died within days, their bodies covered in painful swollen lumps and black spots. Some towns lost so many people they couldn't bury all the bodies, so they just wrote, "We're all dead" on the town gates and sealed themselves in. Smallpox was another ruthless enemy, killing about 30% of those infected and leaving survivors permanently scarred. The disease was so common that having a face unmarked by pox scars was considered unusual, a rarity worthy of comment in historical records. Children faced terrible odds. Between 20 and 50% died before reaching their 5th birthday. Measles, whooping cough, and scarlet fever swept through communities regularly. As a young person today, your first nasty illness in the Dark Ages would likely be your last. The understanding of disease was based mostly on wild guesses. Many believed illness came from bad air or an imbalance of bodily fluids. Some thought disease was punishment from heaven. Few understood that dirty water, spoiled food, or contact with sick people spread illness. People often blamed witches, outsiders, or minorities for outbreaks, leading to violence against innocent groups. Towns had no sewage systems, with human waste flowing directly into the same rivers people used for drinking water. Rats, lice, and fleas thrived in the cramped living conditions, spreading typhus and bubonic plague. People rarely bathed, believing water opened the pores to disease. The average person bathed once a year, making "it's not you, it's me" a completely different conversation in medieval dating. Medical treatments often sped up death rather than preventing it. A common treatment for fever involved wearing a necklace of live toads, which were thought to absorb the illness. Wounds were sometimes packed with spider webs, animal dung, or moldy bread. Surprisingly, the moldy bread occasionally worked as a primitive form of antibiotic. The constant threat of disease created a society familiar with death. The average life expectancy hovered around 30 years. Living to 50 made you ancient by medieval standards. Old age was considered 40. If you reached that milestone, you'd be giving advice like, "Back in my day," to people who genuinely never expected to live that long. How would you survive in a world where every cough might be your last? And even if you somehow avoided the many plagues and illnesses, daily life presented challenges beyond what most modern humans could imagine. Let's talk about survival skills. No phones, no electricity, no entertainment. In the Dark Ages, technology was limited to what could be made by hand using the most basic tools. The moment darkness fell, your world would shrink dramatically. Light came only from fire. Candles were expensive luxuries. Most homes relied on a central hearth fire, which gave off little light and lots of smoke. Reading was nearly impossible after dark. If you think your eyes hurt after looking at your phone too long, try squinting at a piece of goat skin in the flickering light of a smoky fire. Home construction was primitive. The typical peasant dwelling measured just 400 square feet for an entire family plus their animals. Walls were made of wattle and daub, a mixture of sticks, mud, and animal dung. Roofs were thatched with straw that housed mice, rats, and insects that regularly dropped onto sleeping residents. Floors were packed dirt covered with rushes that was changed only once or twice a year. Trade and communication moved at walking speed. A journey that takes hours by car today could take days or weeks. Roads were often just muddy tracks, impassable after rain. About 95% of people never traveled more than 20 miles from their birthplace in their entire life. Farming, the occupation of more than 80% of the population, relied on wooden plows that barely scratched the soil surface. A Dark Ages farmer worked from dawn to dusk, yet produced only enough food to feed 4 people. Records show that crop yields were 1/4 of today's levels, with frequent famines when harvests failed. Entertainment? Village festivals a few times a year were the height of excitement. Tales told around the fire, simple musical instruments, and games with sticks and stones were the everyday diversions. No Instagram meant the only filters people knew about were used for straining chunks out of questionable drinking water. Your survival would depend on practical skills like farming, building, and defense, things most of us would struggle with. The learning curve would be steep, and unlike video games, you wouldn't get extra lives when you failed. Could you adapt to this tech-free existence? Perhaps, but as you tried to adjust to this harsh reality, you'd soon discover that the rules governing your daily life were just as foreign and unforgiving. Rules and laws existed in the Dark Ages, but justice looked nothing like our modern court system. Medieval justice was swift, brutal, and often based on superstition rather than evidence. Trial by ordeal was a common way to determine guilt or innocence. One method involved grabbing a red-hot iron bar and walking 3 steps with it. Your burn would be bandaged, and after 3 days, if it was healing cleanly, you were innocent. If it was infected, you were guilty. This legal system basically determined that people with good immune systems were innocent while everyone else was guilty. Another ordeal involved being thrown into water with your hands and feet tied. If you sank, you were innocent. If you floated, you were guilty and executed. Congratulations on being a good swimmer. Your prize is death. The concept of proportional punishment didn't exist. Theft of items worth more than 12 pence, about the value of a sheep, was punishable by hanging. 1 out of every 50 people in medieval England was hanged for theft. Crimes like poaching on a noble's land could result in blinding, mutilation, or death. Local courts were run by nobles or church officials with no legal training. Trials lasted less than a day, with no lawyers or proper defense. The accused often had to represent themselves against professional accusers. The medieval version of law and order was really just order, and mostly consisted of figuring out creative ways to make examples of people. Public shaming was a cornerstone of medieval justice. Minor offenses were punished by the stocks or pillory, devices that locked offenders in place in the town center where they would be ridiculed and pelted with garbage by their neighbors. Women faced even harsher treatment. A woman who gossiped might be forced to wear a scold's bridle, a metal cage locked around her head with a piece that went into her mouth to prevent speaking. False accusations were common, and once accused, proving your innocence was nearly impossible. Without evidence-based trials, your fate often depended on your status or how much you could pay. How would you handle a system where being wrongly accused could mean your life was at risk? The Dark Ages held even more dangers beyond these harsh laws, and your next challenge would make our modern social problems seem trivial by comparison. Your safety? Forget about it. The Dark Ages came with a hefty side order of violence that would make even the toughest modern person tremble. War was a constant companion during these troubled times. Europe alone saw more than 300 separate wars during the medieval period. The famous 100 Years' War between England and France actually lasted 116 years. Medieval war was like a really bad houseguest that overstayed by more than a decade and stole everything you owned. Raiding was a normal profession. Viking raids were particularly feared along coastal areas, where entire monasteries and villages could be wiped out overnight. Between 793 and 1066 AD, Vikings conducted more than 500 separate raids on England alone. These attacks weren't just theft. They often involved brutal killings, kidnapping of slaves, and burning entire villages to the ground. Even in times of so-called peace, banditry and highway robbery were everyday threats. About 1 in 20 travelers was robbed on major roads, with the number climbing to 1 in 8 on less traveled paths. Most robbery victims were also beaten, often fatally. Towns weren't much safer. Early medieval settlements had murder rates about 35 times higher than modern cities. In 14th century London, the murder rate was about 70 per 100,000 people each year. City records from Oxford show that 75% of court cases involved violent assault. Blood feuds between families could span generations, with vengeance killings accepted as normal. If someone from another family hurt or killed your relative, your family was expected to seek revenge. Personal violence was shockingly commonplace. Archaeological studies of medieval skeletons show that about 40% of men had healed skull fractures. Dark Ages social disputes didn't end with an angry tweet. They ended with a fractured skull. Even sports and games were violent. A popular ball game called mob football involved entire villages fighting over a ball, resulting in multiple deaths every year. Medieval sports had only one rule: try not to kill too many people, but if you do, oh well. How would you handle living with constant fear of attack, knowing that a raid or random act of violence could end your life at any moment? And this was just a taste of the harsh reality that made daily existence in these dark times a grueling test of human endurance. Work in the Dark Ages wasn't just hard. It was a non-stop, back-breaking grind that started before dawn and ended after sunset, with no weekends, no holidays, and certainly no paid time off. For peasants, about 80% of the population, the farming year was a relentless cycle of labor. Plowing began in early spring, with men pushing wooden plows through hard soil for up to 12 hours daily. Women and children followed behind, breaking up clumps and spreading manure by hand. It took a week to plow a single acre, and most families farmed at least 10 acres. During planting season, a typical day started at 4 in the morning and ended at 9 at night. Seeds were sown by hand, with families often covering 6 to 8 miles daily walking across fields. If medieval Fitbits existed, peasants would have crushed your step challenge while also being hungry, dirty, and miserable. Summer brought endless weeding, done while bent over in the scorching sun. Farmers spent upwards of 70 hours per week just keeping weeds from choking out their precious crops. Harvest time was even more intense, with everyone, including children as young as 5, working from first light until they could no longer see. Nearly all medieval work was physically demanding. Blacksmiths hammered red-hot metal for 10 hours daily. Tanners worked with toxic chemicals and rotting animal hides. Millers hauled heavy sacks and operated dangerous grinding equipment. Stonemasons lifted blocks weighing hundreds of pounds without modern machinery. Breaks? Rare. Laborers typically paused only twice during the day, once for a quick midday meal and once for brief prayers. Water breaks weren't a thing. Many workers drank only at mealtimes despite performing heavy labor in all weather conditions. There was no retirement plan. People worked until they died or became too feeble to continue. The medieval retirement package consisted of moving to the corner of your child's hut and trying not to eat too much of their food. Child labor was universal. By age 7, most children worked alongside adults. Young boys apprenticed to trades spent 16 hours daily performing menial tasks while being beaten for mistakes. Girls as young as 10 would grind grain, spin wool, and tend livestock from sunrise to sunset? Could you handle the nonstop physical toil of surviving each day, or would it break you? Even the strongest workers faced challenges that went far beyond human control in this harsh world. There were no weather forecasts or comfortable homes to retreat to in the Dark Ages. When nature decided to unleash its fury, you simply had to endure it, often with deadly consequences. Medieval people were completely at the mercy of weather patterns they couldn't predict. A sudden frost could kill crops overnight, leading to starvation. Heavy rains could wash away entire fields and homes. Without meteorologists or weather apps, people relied on folklore and observation of nature for predictions which were often wrong. Winters were brutal and long in medieval Europe. During the Little Ice Age, from about 1300 to 1800, average temperatures were nearly 2 degrees Celsius colder than today. This meant frozen rivers, longer snow cover, and growing seasons shortened by up to 6 weeks. Winter wasn't coming. It was camping out in your backyard for half the year and eating all your food. Homes offered little protection from the elements. Most peasant houses had no insulation beyond the straw in their walls. Windows were small openings covered with oiled paper or cloth, not glass. The only source of heat was a central hearth fire, which created a small warm zone while leaving most of the house freezing. During winter, everyone slept in the same room for warmth, often sharing beds with livestock. Medieval diaries describe people waking up with their beards frozen to their blankets and water buckets solid with ice inside their homes. Deaths from hypothermia were common. Summer brought different challenges. With no air conditioning, homes became stifling hot. During heat waves, nighttime temperatures inside thatched roof cottages could remain above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Water sources could dry up, forcing villagers to travel miles for drinking water. Clothing, too, failed to offer adequate protection. Most people owned only 1 or 2 outfits made of wool or linen. Medieval rain gear consisted of getting soaked and staying that way until the sun came out, which in places like England could mean months of dampness. Could you handle nature's harshness without the comforts of modern climate control? Without reliable shelter, appropriate clothing, or any way to predict what was coming, your survival would depend on luck as much as skill. Looking at all these challenges, the question isn't whether you would survive 24 hours in the Dark Ages, but rather, how many hours would you actually last?